Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We are toward the bottom of Daf Kavches Amud Beis, and Emir Hashem will be getting toward the bottom of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. Is that right? Yeah, that is right. And then on Shabbos, Emir Hashem will also try and do a little bit more. I put Shabbos at an hour and 15 minutes or so before, and we do have some shorter Amudim coming up. Lamed Gimel is particularly short and will help us to catch up pretty well. Um, all right, we're working hard. Yesterday, we began our sugya of trying to determine how we know that when it comes to pigul, of having a machshava that you're not supposed to have during a korban. We made this distinction in the Mishnah. We said that if something is chutz lemakomo, if I have a machshava during shchita that I'm going to eat this meat in the wrong location, so pasal, but ve'ein bo kares. Masha'enkein, if I have a machshava of chutz lizmano, I'm going to eat this korban during the shchita, I say, I'm going to eat this korban after the Zman. So then we say Pigelhu and Chayev Kares. So we struggled mightily to try and find a Marimakom. Today the Gemara is going to conclude on one. A little odd we didn't start with this one, and maybe the reason why was to gain all the lumdus, because there's a certain pashtus in this limud. Let's get started with how we know that chutz l'mekomo is pasal ve'ein bo kares, but chutz l'zmano is pasal v'yesh bo kares. Says the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom, 12 lines from the bottom on Kaf Chesed Beis. Now, La'amar Rava, really, kulu mikra aricha asyan. Everything comes from the longer pasuk. This longer pasuk is from Vayikra Zayin Yud Ches, and we are going to break up this pasuk in a more classical drasha type of way, unlike the drashas of yesterday, where we tried to, the string, and you take this noodle and that, and you make like a net. All the Mari Makomos were everywhere. You had to put them all together. This is much cleaner, even though it's still difficult. Dichsiv. Oh, the shtei achilos akasim medaber. We see that we're not only talking about one type of consumption, but rather two. One is echad achilas adam, echad achilas mizbeach. One could be talking about a person eating, which is talking about saying, I'm going to eat it chutz lemakomo. And one is talking about the mizbeach, which could be chutz lazmano. Then the next part of the pasuk says, "Mi b'sar zevach shlama, mashlamim mefaglin u'mispaglin." Just like, and this is a nuance, and we're not going to spend too much time on this other than the pashtos, but let's say we were dealing with the shlamim, and I was mefagel, I had a kavana on one little kizayis of one little piece of the animal, and that in turn made the rest of the animal also possible. So that's mefaglin u'mispaglin. Afkol mefaglin u'mispaglin, and we'll spend more time on this in the future on Daf Tzadiches, which is really where this sugya is located. And then the next part of the pasuk is shlishi, which clearly hints to zechutz lizmano, referencing the fact that if you have a machshava, why shlishi? There are no korbanos that last that long. All of the korbanos expire prior to the third day. So the word shlishi very clearly indicates that we are not talking that we're talking about chutz lizmano. That's at least part of the pasuk. What does lo yeratzeh mean? That it will not be desirable, namely the korban will not be desirable. So here, another difficult principle, kartzas kosher, kain hartzas puzzle. Just like we would want to say that something is kosher, we would want there to be ritzui. There also are rules for when something becomes puzzle. Now, obviously, ritzui and puzzle, there's no ritzui, that's like they're opposites. So really, the idea is that just like when we try to get something kosher, we want ritzui. We try to get something puzzle, there are also rules. What are the rules? 5 lines from the bottom. Just like to make something kosher, you have to go through all 4 stages of the avoda. Shchita, kabbalah, holacha, zrika. So too, af hartzas puzzle, if you want to get to the point of pigul, you also have to get to that point of ad sheyakrivu kol matira. So just as a practical outgrowth of this, if I have a machshava during shchita, but I never do zrika, I'm not chayiv kares. Let me say that again, right? I have machshava of chutz lizmano. It's my only machshava. I am going to eat this korban at the wrong time, but I never end up finishing the sha'ar avodos. No pickle. So that's what's learned from this part of the pasuk. Hamakriv. What does the word hamakriv in the pasuk mean? So the Gemara says behakravahu nifsal, only as it relates to the shchita component. Ve'eno nifsal b'shlishi. You become you become aser in the beginning, even though you have to wait for the zrika. But the moment of isser is during shchita. It's not when you get to the third day. Remember, you said chutz lizman. I'm going to eat this next Tuesday, right? Let's say today's Thursday, so Friday, Shabbos, let's say Monday. Halachically, today's Friday, Shabbos, Sunday, Monday. I'm going to eat this on Monday. So says the Gemara, yeah, you're behakrava hu nifsal. We don't say that the psul starts on Yom Shlishi. Chutz lizmano is a conceptual thing that I think during the shechita that I'm going to eat it on Tuesday. That the moment is now, not when I eat it later. Even if I never eat it, I'll still be chayav kares as long as I get to the zrika. What does the word oso teach us? Oso means it, and it refers to bezevach hakosum and daber ve'enu b'daber b'kohen. We're not talking about a kohen. We're not talking about people here. We're talking only about the korban itself. What does lo yefashev mean? What does it mean? What? So if you look at the pasuk itself, it will say that bayom ashlishi lo yeratzeh hamakriv oso lo yechashev hamakriv oso, the one who is makriv it, the it is the word we're focusing on. What is the it? That is talking about the korban. But if there was a flaw in the kohen, that would not be a pigul scenario. You might have other problems. You will have other problems. Much better off because there's no kares, right? It's a complicating factor, but it reduces the sentence at the end of the day. So the word oso here is not talking about the kohen, and therefore, if there's a problem with the kohen, okay, you have other sugyas that we've learned already about a kohen puzzle, and we spent time on that earlier in the Masechta. But that's what oso teaches us, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this on the next amud. But be'enu medaber b'kohen. What does lo yechashev mean? That it's not going to be considered. Here we learn a very important principle, one that we will again see throughout this Masechta, which is top of Chavtes Amud Aleph, lo yera bo machshavos acheros. You can't have pigul if you have competing machshavos. So let's say while I'm doing shchita, I have a double machshava of chutz l'mekomo and chutz l'zmano. You're not chayiv pigul. You're not chayiv kares on that. Why? Because you have competing machshava. That's what lo yechashev means. That's what Rashi says. Mekan lemachshavo shemotzios zumizu shemachsheves psul motzia midei pigul. Okay, we would have thought that having more halachically problematic machshavos would have been worse. It's actually the exact opposite. Now, we don't recommend doing any of this, but if you're gonna do a chutz lezmano, you should throw in a chutz lemekomos. You're not chayav kares. I'm not recommending that halachically. I'm not your local Orthodox rabbi, but the Gemara here is teaching us a preclusion, a limiter to pigul, which is that if during the shechita the kavana that he has is this dual kavana of shalo b'mekomo, chutz l'mekomo, and chutz l'zmano, you're not chayav pigul on that.
I think it's been the same avoda.
We're going to discuss that very moment. How do you know that? Did you learn Shas before? No. Yeah, well, that's a machlokes rishonim. That was very good. We're going to discuss that momentarily. The next line is pigul, and look what we learned from the word pigul. Zechutz l'mekomo. Isn't that odd? The word pigul doesn't even apply to chutz l'mekomo in a kare sense. It is still pigul. I guess it's pigul in a way. So some of the Rishonim here point out that the reason why we learn anything from the word pigul about chutz l'mekomo is because the word doesn't need to be in the pasuk. It's an extra word. So you're right that chutz l'mekomo would never be chayiv kares, only chutz l'zmano would be. But from the word pigul, we learn to include in this machshava asura that there is a case scenario of chutz l'mekomo that is granted not chayiv kares, but still possible. V'hanefesh ocheles mimenu, from it, echad v'lo shnayim ve'ezeh. We know that only one of these two machshavos, either the machshava of chutz l'mekomo or chutz l'zmano, is going to be problematic. Which one is it? Ze chutz l'zmano. We know that chutz l'zmano is the one that's going to be chayiv kares to gamar avon minosar the dami le b'zayin beis, as we learned on Shabbos, that Zayin stands for zman. We know that that's a commonality between nosar, which is time-based, and chutz lizmano, which obviously is time-based, and bama, they have similar halachos as well. And therefore, conclusion of the Gemara, we can put a little bit of a period here. We're going to keep analyzing, but we have our answer. Again, yesterday we worked very hard to figure out why the other answers didn't work. Now, what we did is we looked at a whole pasuk. It's Vayikra Perek. What was it? It was the longer pasuk over here. Ve'im he'achol ye'achel v'chule vayikra yud zayin yud ches, vayikra zayin yud ches. And now we have our answer. We looked at the whole pasuk. We parsed it up into pieces. You can look back over and see the 10 different nakudas that we learned. And the concluding factor is that this remains the source for us. And chutz l'makomo is pasal be'ein bo kares, and chutz l'zmano is pasal v'yesh bo kares. So says the Gemara. We can go home. We have our answer. You're missing a Gemara. I have one by my the art scroll is by my stender. Yeah, this. Okay. So says the Gemara. Then the Gemara is bothered by something that came up yesterday. If you'll recall, remember the Gemara referred to Parshas Kedoshim Tihu. Well, we had a pasuk over there. We had a very similar pasuk. So asks the Gemara, Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, Rava, listen, you did a great job on answering a very difficult question, but I don't understand. L'didach, according to your explanation that we learn everything from Vayikra Zayin, Yud Ches, from the pasuk of Im He'achol Ye'achel, what about the word Shlishi, the Parshas Kedoshim Tihu? What about that word Shlishi? My darshis be. And if you want to look on the side, the whole pasuk is we already have our pasuk in Vayikra, but we have another pasuk in Vayikra, in Vayikra, which is in Parak Yud Tes. It's another 12 prakim later. Very similar pasuk. How do you learn the word shlishi there? So it says the Gemara on Chav Tesim and Aleph 6 lines down. Hahu, that word shlishi in Parshas Kedoshim Tiu mi boile lemakom sheyehei meshulash bedam bebasar uve'emurim. This is a nuance. When we say that you're having a machshava of chutz l'makomo, the makom you're thinking of has to be halachically similar for three things: for dam, basar, and emurim. All three of those things of this korban have to be usher in that new makom. Masha ein kain. If you move to certain parts of the mikdash, again, kachim kalim versus kachim, depends on what you're doing. But there are certain kind of in-between spaces that might only be problematic for dam, but not for emurim. That's not chutz l'makomo. Chutz l'makomo is very, very specific. The chutz l'makomo, the mindset during shechita is, I'm going to be thinking about this place over there, but that place over there has to have that trifecta, that it would be problematic for dam, basar, and imur. Says the Gemara, why would you do that? Tepuk mikra kama. Learn it from the pasuk that we were just learning, the pasuk that we started with on Kaf Ches Amud Beis, our pasuk from Vayikra Zayin, because im he'achol ye'achel mida'afke rachmana b'lashon shlishi. We have the word shlishi over there, and if you actually look, you'll see that we really didn't learn very much from that, from the word shlishi, right? So the Gemara says, let's learn it from there. Says the Gemara, no, we need both Mari Makomos. We needed it to say shlishi by our pasuk and Vayikra Zayin, and we needed it to say shlishi in the pasuk in Kedoshim Tihu in Vayikra Yud Tes, because Amar Rav Ashi, Amrisa l'shmaisa kamidir of Masna. I was talking and learning in front of Rav Masna, and Amar Li, no, and he said as follows: Ime hasam, if I only would have had one Mari Makom, Havamina, I would have learned the pasuk wrong. If I only had our pasuk in Vayikra Zayin and not the pasuk in Kedoshim, I would have learned the pasuk like this: Shlishi Prat and Pigul Klal. And then I would have said, V'nase klal mosif ala prat v'israbu sha'ar mekomos. Remember, we just learned that one of the rules of chutz l'mekomo is that the machshava of the makom has to be a place where dam, basar, and emurin are all invalid. But if I have the pasuk and I learn it the wrong way of shlishi being a prat and pigul being a klal, that's a ribui. And I might have thought that even other locations would be chayiv and chutz l'makomo kamash malan. We need two Mari Makomos to make sure we don't make that error. Tanu Rabbanim. The rabbis have taught us in a brayso 1/3 of the way down on Chav Tesim and Aleph. V'im he'achol ye'achel mi besar zevach shalamav. This is the same exact pasuk we've been talking about. What we'll call now our actual Mari Makom, to teach us that chutz l'makomo is pasal be'ein bo kares, and chutz l'zmano is pasal v'yesh bo kares. What does the brayso say? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, kof oznecha lishmoa, bend your ear and come listen to me. Very poetic. V'mechashev lechol mizivcho b'yom hashlishi hakosov medaber. When, even though the pasuk says he'achol ye'achel, if you eat it, that's not when the isser starts of pigul. The Isser starts by the Machshava during Shechita now, not on the Achila that's later. Even though if I was, out there for English translation Bibles, you easily would have made the mistake of saying the Isser starts by the Achila. That is not correct, says the Gemara. Again, that was the Pasha. That's how what it sounds like. Says Rabbi Eliezer, absolutely not. Maybe, remember, chutz lazmano is kares. Maybe the only time the Isser kares kicks in is only by achila. Says the Gemara, no, Amris, achar shu kasher, yachzer v'yifsal. It can't be. It can't be. You're saying that I had my machshava of chutz lazmano at moment one. For the next 3 days, there was nothing usher at all. And then on day 3, it becomes usher out of the blue because you ate it. The machshava happened at moment 1. The achila happened at hour 72, 73. What happened in the meantime? Rabbi Eliezer can't fathom the possibility that there is this loop of usher, mutter. Oh, he can't even, doesn't work for him. Doesn't clock. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, I totally disagree with you. We have precedent in halacha where things start out usher, become mutter, and become usher again. Where do we see this? Hein matzinu bizav, vizava, v'shomeres yom, keneged yom, shein b'chez kastara. We know they had blood on hour 1, but they're still b'chez kastara as it relates to being a zava until they see multiple v'cheva and shiro sasra. But now during Sheva Nikiyim, it ruins it. Oh. We could have it be the case that it could be the achila. So basically, we have a machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. How do we understand the pasuk itself? Do we say that the Isser Kares happens in the moment of the machshava alone? Granted, you have to get to the point of zrika because you have to do all the steps to generate the Isser, but the Isser started by the machshava, or no? Perhaps it's like Rabbi Akiva saying is that it could be the achila. Amar lo, Rabbi Eliezer says back to Rabbi Akiva, Harehu omer hamakriv b'shas hakravahu nifsal ve'ein nifsal b'shlishi. Look in Chumash. The pasuk says hamakriv. We're talking about at the time of hakrava. Says the Gemara, well, let's push back on Rabbi Eliezer. And we're 2/3 of the way down on Chav Tesem and Aleph. Says the Gemara, O Enu Omer Hamakriv Ella Zehakohen Hamakriv. Maybe we're talking about a Kohen. This we know is not true. Omer Oso Bezebachu Medaber Ve'enu Medaber B'Kohen. So we saw this shita already, that the word Oso teaches us that the psul with a Kohen is not what we're talking about. And if in fact a Kohen was takapasal, then we wouldn't have really had a pigul issue. We would have had a different issue, but not pigul. So that's what the Gemara says. But then we find a problem, because while so far everyone has learned the word oso the same way, which is that oso teaches us that we're talking about it, the korban, and not he, the kohen, but Ben Azai learns the word oso a little bit differently and says the Gemara as follows. We're 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Ben Azai Omer Oso Ma Talmud Lomar. What does the word Oso teach us? Something in a totally different area of halacha. Lefi shenemar lo se'acher l'shalamo. Halacha l'maisa. If a person makes a neder that they're going to bring a korban, the halacha is that they have 3 regalim to bring that korban. We saw this in Maseches Shavuos, I believe, which is where we saw it. Is that true? Rosh Hashanah. That you have 3 chagim. You have 3 holidays to bring it in. Now, what happens after the 3 holidays? Yachol af me'achar nidro below yeratze. Now, it could be that after the shalosh regalim pass, it could be that your korban is not merutza. Or no, maybe you just violated a law of not fulfilling your neder. So says the Gemara, Talmud Omar, Oso below yeratze. Ve'ein ha'ma'acher benidro below yeratze. You're not worthy. You get an iser. If I make a promise that I'm going to bring a korban and I don't bring it after my 3 regalim, iser doraisa for me. Should I still bring my korban? Absolutely. Because the word oso teaches me the Baal Neder gets an iser, but the korban still has ritzui. That's what the Gemara says. Ve'ein ha'ma'acher nidro below yeratze. Acherim omrim. Other Tanoim say, lo yechashev. What does the words lo yechashev teach us? B'machshavahu nifsal, be'eino nifsal b'shlishi. he is actually agreeing with Rabbi Eliezer. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer said that when does the Isser start? By the Machshava. Rabbi Akiva said it's possible it starts by the Achila. So the Acherim agree, they just have a different pasuk. Uben Azai de bezebach hakasu medaber be'enu bekohen minole. Remember that Ben Azai uses the word oso to teach us about an external din by Baal Ta'acher, that a person who does Baal Ta'acher can still bring his korban. But if he doesn't have the word oso, then how do we know he's talking about the korban and not the kohen having a problem? So it says the Gemara, we'll see another sheet in a minute of Acherim who have an explanation as to how we know that we're not talking about a Kohen. The is zivchahu. The language of Ritsui is a language of korbanos. And therefore not talking about a Kohen. So in our psukim over here in Vayikra Zayin, where it says Lo Yerotzeh, that can't be talking about a Kohen. It's got to be talking about the korban itself, not by Baal Ta'acher, but by our case. Okay, well that means that the word, according to Ben Azai of Oso, is extra. How do we learn that word? Uben Azai Oso B'lo Yerotzeh. You wanted to learn about Baal Ta'acher, that he can still bring his korban late, albeit with a slap on the wrist of an Isser D'Oraisa, which is a big deal. We should avoid Isser D'Oraisa. Kimat at all costs. That's pretty much our job. You should spend up to 1/5 of your wealth. If you only have $10,000 and tefillin or $2,000, you got to be ready to do the deed. That's what the mitzvah is. Our obligation is that way. But for an Isser D'Oraisa, you forgo all of your money. It's an unbelievable thing. We don't really think about that too often, but we're not allowed to do Isser D'Oraisa, even if it means losing kol hono. You lose every penny. The din is that way, that we have to be super careful. It says the Gemara, the word oso, where you said that the word oso teaches me that by Baal Ta'acher I can bring my korban late. But what do you do with the word oso? Why do you learn that from the word oso? Mide acherim nafka. You can learn your din of Baal Ta'acher from somewhere else, and then the word oso will still be available. How could you learn it to somewhere else? So the Gemara says, here's how you learn it from somewhere else. The Tanya, 2 lines from the bottom on Chaf Tesamad Aleph. Acherim omrim, Yachol yehe bechor she'ibra shnaso, kipsule hamukdashin v'ipasel. A person has a bechor. What's the halacha? That bechor goes to a kohen. What's the time frame? The first year. What happens if the korban is now a year and a day and you're a slacker and you didn't bring your korban bechor, you didn't give it to the kohen when you should have? Talmud Lomar v'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha ma'asar degonecha v'chulei. Makish bechor l'maiser. We have a hekesh from bechor to maiser. Ma maiser einu nifsal mishana lechaverta. Just like maiser, even if you bring it late, you should still bring it. Af bechor einu nifsal mishana lechaverta. So too bechor. And what the Gemara doesn't say is the ikar nekuda. Same is true by Baal Ta'acher. So if I can learn from this world of maiser and bechor, that those korbanos are brought after their time, and I can simply extend the logic to Baal Ta'acher, that too is valid even after its zman. So then the word oso should be available. So what would the Gemara say back to that? Ben Azai would say, Itzrich, we actually need to have 2 mar mikomos. We need the hekesh of bechor and meiser to teach us that even after the zman, those korbanos can be brought. And we also need the word oso. Why? Sal kadai tachamina hani mili bechor, dilav bar hartzahu. When you bring a bechor, are you getting ritzui? Is that a korban of kapara? No. It's a din in chumash. You're obligated to give the bechor. Yes, absolutely. Go do your job. But it's not a bar ritzui. Ma she'ein kain our case. Aval kodshim dibnei hartzanin hu emalo lirtzui. Kamash malan, the word oso, which teaches us that we are obligated to, that we're still obligated to bring that korban even after the zman, and there is ritzui there. So you can't learn, the Gemara is saying, you can't learn from Bechor. Bechor has no ritzui. Yeah, you need your korban to be successful, but there's no kapara there. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara doubles down and says, Ve'akati mehasam nafka. You're still learning from there, but why don't you learn from the pasuk itself? V'haya v'chachet, the pasuk of lo se'acher itself. Why are you taking the word oso from Vayikra Perek Zayin, which is talking about pigul, and learning a din by Baal Ta'acher that if you're late, you still bring the korban? Learn it from the pasuk of Baal Ta'acher itself. Look at this. Look at the pasuk on the side if you have it. Kisidor neder lashem elokecha. If you make a promise, lo se'acher l'shalmo. Don't delay it. What's the end of the pasuk? V'haya v'cha chet. Look at this gorgeous diuk. Right? The Gemara says 8 lines down. V'haya v'cha chet. V'lo b'korban chachet. You're the fool. You get the Isser, but your Korban still should be brought. Why don't we learn from there? Beautiful question. You're learning from a pasuk in Vayikra Zayin. You should be looking from the pasuk from Dvarim that's talking about these things. So says the Gemara. Uben Azai, Ahumi Boile Vahaya ben Abaya Bechachet. The pasuk of Vahaya Bechachet we actually need for something else. And it's not available for a drasha to teach me that the korban of Baal Te'acher can still be brought. What do we learn from Vahaya Bechachet? Says the Gemara, V'lo be'ishtecha chet. The sin won't carry over to one's wife. We have a fundamental idea, Sal Kadai Techamina, Hoel v'amar Rebbe Lazar v'itema Rebbe Yochanan. This came either from Rebbe Lazar or Rebbe Yochanan, 3rd or 2nd centuries of Amoraim, respectively. Ein ishto shel adam mesa elim kin mevakshin mimenu mamon ve'ein lo. Rahman al-Litzlan, if a person owes money and has money and doesn't pay money, the punishment is on the wife. Not for now, but that's what the Gemara says. So that pasuk teaches me that I might have thought that applies over here by our case of Baal Ta'acher. We'll see that it doesn't. Where do we see that the halacha is, or gosh, the halacha, but that the onesh would be that if a man owes money and has money and doesn't pay, that the punishment carries over to the wife? Shne'emar, im ein lecha l'shalem lama yikach mishkavcha mitachtecha. You can already see mishkavcha mitachtecha, that which you lie on, right? Referencing, it's really not what the pasuk means, bepashtos, but it's certainly berem is what it's referring to. So I might have thought that behai avon de Baal Ta'acher nami mesa, that if a husband makes an obligation to give a korban within 3 regalim, and he doesn't pay that korban, I might have thought that it's in the same category as having money and not paying back your debts. Kamash malan, that they're not the same thing. That's what the Gemara says. Good. Earlier, we saw the following shita. We're at the 2 dots, 1/3 of the way down. We're going to be going toward the bottom of Lamed Amud Aleph, even if we go past 9:30, because we just have to start catching up a little bit faster. So says the Gemara, Acherim Omrim, and here we have to add in the words Lo Yechashev. That was a drasha that we saw in the Brisa on the bottom of Chav Tes Amud Aleph. What did the pasuk of Lo Yechashev mean for Acherim? B'machshava hu nifsal be'en nifsal b'shlishi. Acherim held that the Isser, the moment of pigul that actually kicks in where you're chayiv kares, is by the hakrava, by the machshava, but not when you eat the food on day 3. Rabbi Eliezer, what do you do with those words? We know Rabbi Eliezer learned from another set of psukim, the same halacha, but what do you do with lo yechashev? My avidle, says the Gemara, he uses the words of lo yechashev mi boile lichid Rabbi Yanai. Damar Rabbi Yanai, minayin lemachshavos shemotzios zumizu. Shenemar lo yechashev. How do we know that if you have competing machshavos that you are going to be pater from kares? Because of the pasuk of lo yechashev. Lo ye'era bo machshavos acheros. If I have competing thoughts, one that indicates that I want to do chutz l'makomo, and a competing one that says chutz l'zmano, no pigul. You're a Rasha Marusha, you're terrible, you don't know halacha, you're a big problem. But it's just not kares because you can't have competing thoughts. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I learned that from the words lo yechashev. That's why I couldn't use the same words that Acherim did to learn this principle. Then the Gemara says, V'Rav Mari Masni, Rav Mari Masni, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Minayin lemachashev b'kachem shehu loke. How do we know that if someone has a machshava during kachem that he gets malkos? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar lo yechashev, same pasuk. Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Mari, how can you say that there's a lav that you get malkos by a machshava? What's missing in a machshava? A maisa. And says the Gemara, how can you say that? Lav she'en bo maisu, v'chol lav she'en bo maisa en lokin alav. Says the Gemara, and we've seen this shita numerous times before in Shas. If you look her on the side, Baba Mitzia, Sanhedrin, Shavuos, Makos in many places. This is a principle we've seen before, even though I would imagine we don't paskin in this way. Lemaisa, Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Lav Shein Bo Maisa Lokin Allah. That we do have Malkos there, so it very well could be, says the Gemara, that Lo Yechashev is still going to teach us about Malkos, even though the Machshava is a Lav Shein Bo Maisa. That brings us to the Mishnah halfway down on Chav Tesim Beis. Let's continue. And really, had we learned the Mishnayos in like Kahati, I imagine these two Mishnayos are actually put together. The previous one, which began teaching us about the distinctions between Chutz L'Mekomo and Chutz L'Zmano. This is the Mishnah from the bottom of Chav Zayin Amud Beis, where we saw these principles laid out, that Chutz L'Zmano is Kares and Chutz L'Mekomo is not. And now that kind of makes a little bit more sense when we start our Mishnah. Zehaklau, right? We taught this idea, the distinction between Chutz L'Mekomo and Chutz L'Zmano. And now the Mishnah says halfway down on Chav Tesim Beis in perfect flow, Zehaklau. This is the rule. Kol hashochet v'hamekabel v'hamahalech v'hazorek. Anyone who does shchita, kabbalah sadam, walking the dam to the mizbech or zrika, if it's le'echol, if your machshava is le'echol davar shedarko le'echol, ulehakdir davar shedarko lehakdir, you're doing something normal, right? You want to eat a food that's edible, or you want to be makdir, to burn something up that isn't edible, and remove the word kizayis. That's just an editor's error. As you can see on the side here, it says in the Shita Mekubet says that this word is removed. If it's chutz lemekomo, if the machshava you have during any of these four stages is, I'm going to eat this food in a different location, pasal vein bo kares, like we know. And if it's chutz lezmano, pikol v'chayav and love kares, ubilvad sheyakriv hamatir kimitzvaso. But even though it's true that chutz lezmano can generate kares, that's only true if you get to the matir of the korban, which is the zrika. If you never get to the zrika, you never get to kares. So it's like a bit of a funny flow. Like I'm about to do the shchita, I'm in the middle of cutting. Machshava chutz lezmano, I'm going to eat this later. Okay, so I did the isser. But the isser doesn't trigger until 10 minutes later or 5 minutes later when we do the actual zrikas hadam. Again, it's the logistics, the halachic logistics are complicated. They are complicated. Says the Gemara, Ketzad karev hamatir kimitzvaso. What are we talking about when we say that we're being matir the mitzvah? So here we're going to have about 10 examples in a row. We're not going to go deeply into each of them. We'll learn them in a Daf Yomi kind of way. But I would ask that you just hold cup with me for a few minutes with a little more focus, because these cases vary very slightly. Shachat b'shtika. Let's say that you had perfect kavana, you had no kavana during shtika. Kibel v'halach v'zorak chutz lezmano. Your chutz lezmano mindset was in one of the later parts of the avoda, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, sheshachat chutz lezmano. Really, step 1 of the avoda was chutz lezmano. The kibel v'halach v'zorak b'shtika. So either you had perfect kavana and shchita, terrible kavana in the last 3, or vice versa. Oh, 5 lines before the wide lines, 2/3 of the way down. Oh, sheshachat v'kibel v'halach v'zorak chutz lezmano. In all of those cases, zehu shemakriv hamatir kimitzvaso. Because what did you do? You had a machshava about chutz lezmano, and you got all the way through zrika. You checked the box. Now you're chayav kares. Ketzad lo karav hamatir kimitzvaso. What would it look like if you were unsuccessful in getting to the finish line of those 4 avodos? So the Gemara says, shachat chutz limekomo, which is not chayav kares to start with, and kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz lezmano. So we have competing machshavos, right? Oh, last of the short lines. Oh, sheshachat chutz lezmano. Really, your shchita was chutz lezmano, but kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz lemekomo. Again, competing thoughts, 1 or 3, or right, whichever one. You're just inverting where you had your machshavos. First long line. Oh, sheshachat v'kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz lemekomo. Or you had all of your thoughts were chutz lemekomo. Or hapesach ve'achata sheshachtan shelo lishman v'kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz lezmano. Competing thoughts again. You did a korban pesach, which becomes puzzle when it's not lishma, like we spent many hours talking about. And then your second parts of the avoda, 2, 3, and 4, you had a machshava chutz lezmano. Oh, sheshachat chutz lezmano you did the shchita wrong, but kibel v'holach v'zorak shelo lishman, o sheshachad v'kibel v'holach v'zorak daman shelo lishman. In all of these cases, zehu shelo karav hamater kimitzvaso. You got to hit it out of the park. The only way to be chayiv kares is to do all four avodos. And in one of those avodos, at least one of them, you have a machshava of chutz lizmano with no competing machshava. Then you are going to be chayiv kares. It is not a simple isser to do. You really gotta try. It's not a simple thing. So that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. Le'echol kezayis bachutz and kezayis lamachar. Kezayis bachutz, that's a makom issue. Kezayis lamachar is a zman issue, competing thoughts. Or kezayis lamachar, kezayis bachutz. Or kechatzi zayis bachutz and kechatzi zayis lamachar. Or kechatzi zayis lamachar, kechatzi zayis bachutz. Pasal ve'ein bo kares. Because it's mixed thoughts, right? You have a mixed makom, which is location, and zman. That will never yield kares. You're breaking too many rules. Amar Rabbi Yehuda zehaklal. These words are going to become very important in a minute. Zehaklal. Kol shemachsheves hazman kadma lemachsheves hamakom. Pigul v'chayav and alav kares. Yes, you're right. If you have two machshavos, they could save you from kares. However, if your first machshava is zman, chutz lezmano, and your second machshava is chutz lemakomo, you already violated pigul. I'm sitting there with my shchita knife. I'm shechting, I'm going to do this chutz lezmano. I'm also going to do it chutz lemakomo. When I finish my first sentence, I'm done. I already said chutz lezmano in my head. I'm done. That's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. And here, the Rishonim write that what is the guiding principle of Rabbi Yehuda? It's tafas lashon rishon. What was the first thing that went through your head? If the first thing that went through your head is, I'm going to eat this chutz lezmano, tafas lashon rishon, ta'iv kares. If the first lashon was makom, then you're pasal ve'ein bo kares. But the Chachamim don't agree. The Chachamim omrim, and then our discussion in the Gemara for the next Amud is going to be trying to figure out the scope of their machlokas. We won't be able to finish it today, but we will get partway through it. What do the Chachamim hold? The Chachamim omrim, zev pasal ve'ein bo kares. No matter what, if you had the machshava of zman first followed by makom, or makom first followed by zman, it doesn't matter. Neither of them are chayiv kares. They don't hold tafas lashon rishon. They hold everything. We look at the whole package of what you did. I understand what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. You already had a machshava of chutz lezmano. Now you have a later thought of chutz lemakomo. You want to get out of the woods. You're done already. I understand that. The Chachamim say, no. We have to look at it as a package deal. You had two machshavos. Okay, now let's pause and look at your two machshavos. Oh, you did first chutz lezmano, and okay, you're pater because you had two machshavos. And just to conclude this Mishnah, lechol kechatzi zayis lahaktir kechatzi zayis. Someone had a machshava for achila, and the other machshava was to be maktir, to put it on the mizbech, kosher, she'ein achila b'aktor mitzdarfin. That's not a problem at all. That's not that korban is going to be considered to be kosher. Now let's get into the machlokes of how to understand Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Let's just review and then we'll dig in. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that if your first machshava was chutz lezmano, even if you have a subsequent thought of chutz lemakomo, you are going to be chayiv kares because tafas lashon rishon. The Chachamim, on the other hand, did not feel that way. The Chachamim said, even if your first lashon was chutz lemakomo, lemaisa, because you had two thoughts, I'm looking at it as a package deal, and you're going to be pater because you had shtei machshavos. So says the Gemara on Chav Tesam at base, 4 lines from the bottom. Omar Ilfa. Ilfa says, Ilfa is an Amora. Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is only b'shtei avodos, over different avodos. What does that mean? That means if during shchita I thought chutz lezmano, and during Kabbalah I thought chutz lemakomo, that's where Ilfa says the machlokes is. Aval, says Ilfa, a chiddush, be'avoda achas. Let's say that just within shchita, I had both machshavos. Divrei Akol, Iruv Machshavos Habe. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who would have normally said that Tafas Lashon Rishon, not within the same avoda, only spanning two avodos. That's the sheet of Ilfa. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda would back down if it was all within one avoda. The Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. Af be'avoda achas machlokes. No, Rabbi Yehuda would still hold his unique shita, even if it's only within one avoda of shchita. And during the cutting, the first machshava is chutz lizmano, the second, no, he doesn't agree with Ilfa. That's going to be chayiv kares. What came out of your mouth is first chutz lizmano, you're done. I don't care what follows that. Doesn't matter what follows it. You're done. So this is a machlokes. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Wait. Bishlama le'ilfa, midereisha b'shtei avodos, seifa nami b'shtei avodos. I could understand in the reisha, the way the whole Mishnah was structured. Remember we said, if by shchita you thought X, and by Kabbalah Zrika you thought Y. So says the Gemara, I understand ilfa. If the reisha was talking about machshavas makom and zman in different avodos, seifa nami b'shtei avodos, then machlokes, that I get. Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim also must be over shtei avodos. Ela Rabbi Yochanan, reisha b'shtei avodos. Every case in the reisha was over different avodos. Some shchita, some Kabbalah halacha and zrika. But then the seifa b'avoda achas. When we get to the end of the Mishnah, you're going to now tell me machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is only within one avoda. That's not even thematic. That's not good. The Gemara says in top of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, yes, Rav Yochanan has no problem with that, and he says in Reisha b'shtei avodos Seifa bein be'avoda achas bein b'shtei avodos. So he taka holds this way all the way to the bank, even though the Reisha was structured as shnei avodos. The whole look back. If by shchita you thought about makom, and by the latter three you thought about zman, that's how the whole first half of the Mishnah was structured. Says Rabbi Yochanan, I don't care if the first words that come out of your mouth is chutz lizmano, you're chayiv kares even within one avoda. That's how he holds. The Gemara is going to pose a couple of questions. Number one, Lamed Amud Aleph at the top of the page, 2 lines down. Tnan. The Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda zeh haklal im machshavas hazman kadma lemachshavas hamakom pikol v'chayav and alav kares. We saw that in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda held if the first machshava that you thought of was chutz lizmano, you are down for the count and you are going to be chayav kares. So says the Gemara. Wait 1 second. Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan hainu diktani zeh haklal. I understand. Now we flip the script. Our first question was on Rav Yochanan. The second one understands Rav Yochanan. The language of Zeh HaKlal is a broad language. Very broad, right? This is the general rule. According to Rav Yochanan, who says that the machlokes is both within one avoda and spanning two avodos, broad. I understand why you said Zeh HaKlal. Ela Ilfa, who says that it's narrow, they're only talking about within one avoda, but by shtei avodos, everyone agrees. Mai zeh haklal. Rav Yochanan must be right, and Ilfa must be wrong, because the language that Rabbi Yehuda used is a broader language, but Ilfa said that the scope of the machlokes was super narrow. Must be that Rav Yochanan's right and Ilfa's wrong. Kasha. Beautiful. The Gemara says that's a very good question. And let's try another one. Tanan Hasam, we are going to go into Maseches Tmura basically for a couple of minutes, and we'll come back out in a couple of minutes. Says the Gemara, a person says, Harei zu Tmuras Ola, Tmuras Shlamim. So I have 2 animals. I have an Ola and I have a Shlamim. And then I have a Chulin animal. And I want to transfer the Kedusha from the 2 animals of the Ola and the Shlamim to my Chulin animal. This is Aser. This is called Tmura. You're not allowed to do Tmura at all. It's an Isser D'Oraisa. It works. The mechanics work, but it's Aser. So what if somebody says, my 2 animals over here, my Ola and my Shlamim, I want to transfer their Kedusha onto the Chulin animal. Harei zu Tmuras Ola. It only will be an Ola. Tafus Lashon Rishon. You already see similarities to Rabbi Yehuda. So what we see over here is, what did he say first? Harei zu Tmuras Ola, followed by Tmuras Shlamim. So we see that according to Divrei Reb Meir, that the first words that come out of your mouth by the Tmura are the words that matter. Amar Rav Yossi, im lekach niskavein tchila. If what you really intended was that both Ola and Shlamim should transfer their status over to the Chulin animal, hoel v'i efshar lahoti shtei shemos ka'achas. Just I can't say 2 things at the same time. I'm not. like Rabbi Rezna gave it, it's Zachor v'Shamar. Kodesh Baruch Hu Zachor v'Shamar b'dibur echad. We can't do that. But my ratzon is that I wish I could. I want both Ola and Shlamim to transfer over to the Chulin. So Rabbi Yossi says a chiddush dekadin. He says, Afal pi that we're not the Eibishter. And we can't say Zachor v'Shamar b'dibur echad. Ola u'Shlamim b'dibur echad. I can only say them sequentially and not overlapping. Dvarav kayamin. This requires Rishonim. That's not normal. L'maisa, I didn't say it together. What about Tafas Lashon Rishon? Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold of Tafas Lashon Rishon. It's both. 50-50. Correct. Now, you did an Isser Daraisa. All three animals are Kadosh. And the Tmura animals have to now go graze until they get a mum. And then you cash out. Half goes to Ola, half goes to Shlama. But his shita is wild that he... Oh, well, I wanted it. I just couldn't get. Yeah, but you didn't say the word. Nevertheless, that's what Rabbi Yossi holds. The Misha Amar. Let's just change the case just a bit. If a person were to say first Harezu Tmuras Ola, we're a third of the way down on Lam and Amid Aleph. We'll stop about a few lines from the bottom. And then V'nimlach. So first I said Harezu Tmuras Ola, and then I changed my mind. And then I say no. What I really meant was Amar Harezu Tmuras Shlamim. Harezu Ola. Seemingly everybody agrees to that. Good. Iboyaluhu. Let's ask the following question. Let's say that a person didn't say Tmuras Ola, Tmuras Shlamim. He said Harezu Tmuras Ola v'Shlamim. He removed the extra word Tmura. So says the Gemara, Mahu, what would be the din there? Or Lachatzos Mahu. Or if he said, I want the Chulin animal to be half of each. Amar Abaye. This is Machlokes Amoraim. Amar Abaye, Beha Vadai Mode Reb Meir. Reb Mode would agree in this case that it's 50-50, because there is no Tafas Lashon Rishon, really, even though the word Ola did come out of your mouth first. But because it wasn't Tmuras Ola and Tmuras Shlamim, but you said Tmuras Ola v'Shlamim, so Abaye says Reb Meir would agree. Rava is not having it. Rava, about almost halfway down. Rava Amar Adayin hi machlokes. What are you talking about? Amar Rava Abaye. L'didach de Amris b'ha v'aday mod Reb Meir. And now we get back to our case. Hare shchita delechi lachtzos dami upalik. Remember what we just said. What if you have two machshavos in one avoda? I'm shechting. There's no way to have two machshavos while I'm shechting. That's a shecht. It takes 1 second, right? So Rava says, I can show you from the bottom of Chaf Tesamud Beis in our sugya that you're not. We have a machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, at least according to some shitas, that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, that there's a machlokes even within one cut, and it's still not possible. So why are you saying it's pasha to Rav Meir by Tmura? There's a machlokes over here in our case within shchita, within one avoda. Amar le, what does Abaye say back to Rava? Mi sabris eina l'shchita ela levasov. Do you mean to say that shchita is a moment in time when you finish the shchita? Absolutely not. Yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof. There's time. I can cut slow. So if I take my shchita knife, sharp as can be, and I start cutting very softly, and it takes me 12 seconds to do the cut between the kana and the veshet, and during that time I have two machshavos asuros, chutz l'makoma, chutz l'zmanu. Abaye says back to Rava, you've got it all wrong. Over here by Tmura, it is a moment in time. But by Shchita, there's enough time to have two machshavos. Those cases are not the same, Abaye says to Rava. Umishna seinu de Amar Simon Rishon chutz l'zmano, Simon Sheni chutz l'makomo. It could be in our case that when he does the kana, he has one machshava. When he does the veshet, he has another machshava. Beautiful question. So Abaye is not having it from Rava. The Gemara then pushes back and says, well, hold on 1 second. Hare kmitza, dilechi lachtzos dami upalig. In the case of kmitza, by flour, there is also a moment in time where in the kmitza, you just do the kmitza, right? So says the Gemara, there we see that there's a machlokas. The Gemara says, no, hasam nami. Abaye says again, Da'amar kometz mincha chutz lizmano, kometz levona. There's more ingredients. So again, Rava, you're comparing apples and oranges. We're not talking about a moment in time by the kmitza. We're talking about two different parts of the kmitza. So there too, there's time to have multiple machshavos asuros. Says the Gemara, I'll give you a good example, and we're going to be closing with this. Says the Gemara, Hare kometz de minchas chote deleka lavona bahadei upligi. What about the minchas chote? The minchas chote, you're a sinner. We don't put in anything extra in that. It's just dry. There's just flour. There is no lavona. So says the Gemara, there we see upligi. There we have a machlokes tanaim, and that is a moment in time because it's not separate lavona and kmitza. Says the Gemara, lo pligi. There is no machlokes over there. And the Gemara says, Amar Rashi, and by the way, im tim salomar pligi, I'll still get out of this for you. Even if you want to say that there's a machlokes over there, pligi b'psios. I can take one step while I'm doing the kmitza, machshavas chutz l'makomo, machshavas chutz l'zmano. So Abai and Rava have this tension. Rava seems to be like pretty categorical about it, that like, it's not possible to have two machshavas in one time. And Rabbi is like, in all of your cases, I can show you that there's enough time to have shtei machshavas. We'll stop right here at let me just read two more lines actually. Rav Simi Bar Ashi Masni Keda Abaye. Sorry, Rav Simi Bar Ashi does have mishnayos like Abaye, who said above that Rav Meir would be moda in these cases, that it would be half. And there's also Rav Huna Bar Nosan Masni Keda Rava, that we actually have Marim. It's unclear from our Gemara who we paskin like. So we'll stop right here at Ki Asa. On Shabbos, we'll pick up from Ki Asa on the bottom of Lamed Amin Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.